Kari has been two-term president of the Higher Ed User Group. She is currently the Senior Vice President of Digital Transformation at Ellucian, and she's been involved with higher education for over 20 years. Um, right, she is at one point she was named Oracle Magazine's Implementer of the Year. She drives roadmaps and strategies for ERP and SIS solutions. Has really worked as a thought leader at user groups and industry events for 20 years, and is really focused on usability and accessibility, and is focused on digital transformation and creating sustainable models for tomorrow's institutions. Really, as you come in and you're talking about then the different things that we can do, and you're looking at how are you going to build a campus with a sustainable ROI, and I'm just going to hand it over to you, and for the next 20 minutes, take it away.
Sounds good. Thanks, JTH. And happy to be here with the group today. And I'm excited to participate in the inaugural Experience Summit for Beyond Academics. I think this is exciting, and I'm really excited to see such a strong focus on transforming the administrative experience for students. The academics are obviously super important, and yet so much of a student's experience is with administration, and some of that, you heard me talk about existential threats. As we went through this spring, we talked we did some primary research, we sponsored some additional research, and then we've been working with our own customers on what are the areas that they are concerned about, both going into the experience of the pandemic, but also now coming out of the experience of the pandemic. And it shouldn't be particularly surprising that these were the top 4 areas for presidents, and student enrollment, retention, and success, and particularly I was going to say particularly in public higher ed, but that's not necessarily true. It's just as much a threat for private. We were hearing that even before the pandemic, with demographics and the demand for higher ed and some of the buzz that caused. So future student enrollment, then a hard switch, a hard emphasis on mental health and student well-being, and student engagement in a remote emergency instruction kind of mode. And another one of the institutions we work with pretty heavily is Connecticut State Colleges and Universities. And they're already in our cloud. They've already done a bunch of transformation. And what they said the pandemic did for them is really shine a light and illuminate the areas where they hadn't quite transformed enough. And so if they still had paper processes, if they still had workflows that were there because we've always done it that way, it amplified or exacerbated the negative student experience that folks had. And so in particular, that was around student engagement. And in particular, we heard that our institutions coming out of this pandemic were struggling with overcoming the friction points that are often embedded in existing processes that we don't even realize are friction until you have this new experience. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. We'll talk another thing that our presidents were talking about was very straight up overall financial stability, which is why we talked about this session is about ROI and fiscal sustainability, institutional sustainability. We've talked about this many times. No money, no mission. And it's not that these institutions are looking to exploit the financial situation. They are very simply looking to exist and to make sure that they can carry on their mission. So we'll talk more about how to derive ROI for mission-driven benefits as well. That online learning experience, there they've recognized they have more work to do in order to go from emergency remote instruction to full on remote personalized online instruction and support. And there are a lot of examples. There are a lot of, I guess, exemplars out in the wild in our industry in higher ed that have shown how to do it. We just haven't seen a lot of them at scale. And what we have also not seen effective examples of is how to move en masse and how to transform an existing institution into an online learning experience that is truly personalized, really remote, remotely delivered, and student oriented. So we saw similar shifts in the 90s and early 2000s. When I worked at the University of Minnesota, we had a medical school. We had one at the University of Colorado as well, and I did work with both medical schools, and I did some work with the ACGME at the time, which is responsible for graduate medical education. And it was right when we were turning to patient-centered care. Higher ed needs to make that same change to student-centric care. And I think that's a lot of what Steve was just talking about. But I also think it's something that all of higher ed is talking about. We've got to we're realizing through this pandemic that we have a real opportunity for how to get to student-centric care, student-centric education. And then enabling faculty and staff to work remotely is certainly on the list. That was the number one challenge cited by IT leaders. So moving forward, we then go to, actually, was there a question? Am I supposed to be taking questions here in the middle of the presentation? I can stop. Did someone raise their hand? All right, I'll keep going and we'll come back.
No, we'll come back.
Okay.
We've got some time reserved at the end for
Okay.
for questions.
Great. Okay. So during the April 2020 timeframe, we did a CARES Act webinar where we brought some experts together and discussed the CARES Act and then some recommendations for how to proceed. And at the time, 41.3 institutions surveyed indicated that, quote, technology supporting gaps in the move to remote learning and administrative processes as their primary area of focus. And so thinking about that as our foundational principle, in March, it was all about just managing the crisis, right? Making sure everyone's safe, performing critical activities, addressing the unbudgeted financial costs, minimizing revenue uncertainty, pursue that immediate funding opportunity, sign the CARES Act documentation, get that contract, draw down the money, and start dispersing it. And ramp up your critical reporting and oversight of student and financial aid data. So we gave a ton of guidance on that. And I think institutions really responded well in March to the crisis. April to September then was all about stabilizing operations. And it included, what do we need to do? It shone a different light on the strategic planning priorities and looking for new revenue opportunities and cost-cutting opportunities, reaching out to students to try to address those mental health needs that we just talked about, and then working hard to eliminate those friction points. And so we saw a lot of institutions start to pursue targeted operational wins. So might be digitalization of admissions or registration or payroll for those who hadn't done that already. But for others, it might have been, a little bit deeper in around basic needs support, availing yourself of campus resource, both campus and community resources to address food insecurity and housing insecurity and technology needs. Technology as a basic right, as a basic need, really took a front seat the last 8 months. We've been talking about it. I attended a basic needs summit in California in February of last year, and there were like 3 sessions on technology as a basic need when it comes to education. And then, boom, we go into pandemic mode, and all of a sudden, those people seemed so prescient and the oracles of the future predicting that. And boy, higher ed has really stepped up, I think. It's going to require probably some policy intervention in order to truly address it. But those are the types of targeted operational wins that we saw we recommended through that period, and then we saw institutions with uptake. Now we're talking about the long-term case for change. How do we take everything we've learned over the last 9 months? How do we take the things that we already had in mind? So we've all been in higher ed for a while. Sometimes I cringe when I throw that 20 years out there because it's gone by so fast, and I can't possibly have been in the industry for that long, as I'm sure many of you. But the upshot is there have been things we've wanted to do for a long time. And now, do we have the impetus to do them? Do we have the impetus to truly turn this into student-supported, student-centric learning, student-centric administration? So we've been working with customers now to create this long-term case for change. And it sounds so basic, and it's actually not something higher ed does by nature yet. Pockets do, but we don't do it by nature in totality. And so starting with aligned to outcomes. So you've got to make investment decisions that really do advance the unique, right? So it's what's your unique, your USP, vision and strategic goals, and then get that evidence. And we still struggle as a higher ed industry to agree on the facts. And right now, where we as a culture are struggling with the definition of facts, I saw a great definition, which was facts are the things on which two people agree so that you can then have the debate. So you've got to get that data. You have to have evidence to support the assumptions so that then you can plan the interventions, so that then you can plan what the next strategy needs to be. So if you look at, demographics and the demand for higher ed or something similar and say, look, I'm in Minnesota, which happens to be where I am, and we're anticipating this kind of decline in this time period. But then you look at your own schools, your own institutions' data, and you realize that doesn't fit your profile, then you can have a different conversation than if you just blindly take that trend, for example. And when we look at what causes friction in the student success experience, it can be re-entry after you've been asked to leave. It can be transfer friction. It can be basic needs. It can be, I ran out of financial aid. There's all kinds of reasons that students don't succeed in their overall path forward. You need to know what those are at your institution. And then it has to be executive championed. So this executive champion has to drive the quest for knowledge, right? What's the quest for truth, the path forward. That's another one of my favorite quotes, which is, I view my debate opponent as my ally in the quest for truth. So executives that can champion that quest for truth, that drives active participation, active ownership, including, whether it's your deans and your faculty members, or whether it's your administration and your students, driving that comprehensive yet led, not wandering, actively led ownership. Got to be efficient. If we in higher ed, that's another one of my, for some of you who've been around long enough to remember Bob Kovacic, who sadly we lost last year. He was my first mentor from the University of Minnesota, and he used to have all kinds of quips like, in higher ed, a vote of 99-1 is a tie. And I use that almost every day. And that's why you have to have something that's both executive championed, but also efficient. You've got to inform transparent, responsive decision making, ROI based decisions. And the way you get there is through paying attention to the facts and the data and the evidence, and then get to how you analyze holistic value. And that's really where I want to spend the rest of our time, is that holistic value. These are some examples of ways to evaluate how to conceptualize your strategy, and then how to measure the results. So upper left is the American University of Cairo. They had a very specific goal of increasing financial aid applications and increasing the various types of financial aid. And over the course of 2 years, they saw a 32% increase, in particular in scholarships and fellowships, which was a huge boost to their student success and persistence statistics. And overall, they have a really strong reputation, not only in the Middle East, but worldwide. And that just meant that they had more students that they were able to put out into the community. At Royal Holloway, so staying on the upper level, at Royal Holloway, we saw that when they moved to the cloud, they were able to improve their IT team performance. So this speaks straight up to the efficiency calculations. And now they're able to address between 10 and 30% more of their time, which was redirected to the user experience and higher value projects, frankly. I talked about Connecticut state colleges and universities a moment ago. That's if you drop down on the right. And they've reduced their operational IT budget by 50% while increasing their disaster recovery business continuity position. And in Colorado Community College, they standardized their data across 13 colleges, which then allowed them to identify emerging market trends. They eliminated the haves and have-nots. And one of the examples of where they really focused was, because they were able to standardize and identify those trends, they've been able to identify growth behaviors, both the growth and the behavior patterns of part-time students, which is great, because in the Colorado Community College system, they have a lot of part-time students. And we're seeing more of that even through this pandemic. And so I give these 4 examples because ROI doesn't have to be a one-time measure. It can be across a number of dimensions, and that can include revenue, mission-driven benefits. So maybe you have hardcore, ROI calculations, but it might be by improving your transfer pathway, you improve your performance-based funding. You improve because you have reverse transfer. Now you can take credit for additional achievement of your students through certificates and through additional degrees granted. Maybe it's, as noted at Cairo, it's the additional financial aid. Maybe it's efficiencies and effectiveness. Maybe it's risk management and the reputational risk. So I'm going to pause there, and I think we open it up for questions at this point. Correct, JTH?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I was looking at your examples there at the end, and they're all great examples. What was some of the process? How did they come to decide that those were the things they wanted to focus on?
Yeah. So a lot of data. Our most effective institutions have their CIOs at the cabinet level. Their CIOs are a strategic partner, and they have they are able to then align technology to the institutional strategy. And so there are exceptions to that. Obviously, some of the folks I just highlighted also have their CIO reporting into the CFO and
Mhm.
administration. But irrespective, when your CIO is able to be a full partner, then you can start to put your digital roadmap together, your digital strategy together with operating principles. So some of my favorite operating principles, one comes to us from Greenwich University in the UK. Question bureaucracy. That's a good guiding principle. And then everything flows from there. We've got others where, everything's cloud first, or we will have student centric care. And then that's the lens through which they operate. So that's thing one, is your operating model. Then thing two is we've got about 120 calculations that you can go through to say, if I change this, it will improve my return on investment or my mission driven benefits or avoid my risk in these ways. And so we have a strategy workshop that really doesn't take that long. It can be 6 hours of customer engagement, but we go through it with them to then say, and here's where you're going to get your biggest bang for the buck now, or your time, biggest bang for your time investment now. Here's what you can do second. Here's what you can do third, and roadmap that out for folks.
So it sounds like there you have two key elements. Is that you've got you've got your CIO really at the table, and it has strong support, but also is data and making sure that you've got access to well scrubbed, reliable data. Some of my experience has been is that people will go do an initiative and then kind of reverse engineer what the benefit was because they never started out with a baseline. This is what we actually have.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges there? What are some of the challenges you've seen with the data?
So it's interesting because most of the time, in my experience at least, when you say data governance, people yawn and then look at the CIO and and don't take full ownership. And I was presenting earlier this year with Mecca Salahuddin, Dr. Mecca Salahuddin from Alamo Community College District. And I said that to her, and she says, "Oh no, we look forward to our data governance meetings." She said, "We have real discussions there about the definitions of our data, and you can see it. And then they use their data to target the next intervention, and you can see it in their outcomes. They have lively discussion and debate, which is." If your meetings are boring, it means that you don't have the right team dynamic, right? So that's thing one. They have lively meetings where they talk about what is the data telling us? Is it clean? They're absolutely certain their data is clean. And that's step one. You've got to get your data clean. If your data is not clean, you can't base your decisions on it. You'll make the wrong decisions. Or you won't realize the benefits you thought you were going to, and then you're disappointed, and then that's an unvirtuous cycle.
Yeah.
But their example is, then every year they refresh what they're going to do next. Did that have the outcome we expected? And what do we do next? And so, yeah, I agree, JTH, that it's all, the data is crucial. You have to have clean data.
So I do have one question here from Preeti. She asked, do you feel ownership of the executives is more of an issue for student success or inclusiveness for the stakeholders in creating the unique vision to which you referred? So is it that you need, which is more important, getting the executives to own that, or to get the stakeholders also to be included in creating that unique vision?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it goes back to that notion I just brought up, which is a vote of 99-1 is a tie. And so I think it's a balance. I think you can't bring your full institution along if you don't have good leadership. Leadership is necessary but insufficient. And inclusiveness and buy-in in the ranks is also necessary but insufficient. You have to have both. And we talk a lot about the ADKAR model of change, right? You know, acknowledge and create the desire for change and know how to change and so on and so forth. Um, and and having leadership and a vision and the ability to drive to something that is future oriented, particularly when you bite off a chunk at a time, this incremental change that has been talked about, you can usually get people to line up behind you to get that done. But you have to have people lined up behind you. Gandhi is the one who said, you know, I have to, my people are over there, I have to go because I'm their leader, right? Like that's the, so you got to have both.
So this has been a really interesting conversation, Kari. Thank you very much for joining us. It was great insights and great thoughts about sort of how to look at what you choose and to move forward. So much of the stuff that I've read about ROI lately has been, how to cut down cost of instruction versus looking for other things that you can do. And it's really critical to get everybody on board and creating that data-centric culture. Really, thank you. Great conversation. Thank you for joining us and helping to make the afternoon a success. I am going to turn this back over to Matt, who is taking this. Then, how are you going to build in that ROI, a model for lifelong learning? So, thank you, Kari.
Kari,
Matt, take it away. It's all yours.
So Kari, thank you so much. The ROI question, that's a question that I always pose, like to a school. Like, don't tell me about the technology. What is it you want? How do we get the ROI? I can't tell you, we go back the past 8 years, there's many schools who invested. The ROI is not there. They can spin it in any way they want. And the
didn't
ROI
happen.
Didn't happen.
Yeah.
So what we need to do moving for the next 8 years is that everything a school does, the ROI needs to be there. We should be having milestones. We should have outcomes that are driven by the student-centricness of it. So like I said, I'm grateful. I'm really grateful for you joining us. We will have more of these summits that we'll have deeper discussions. So
I look forward to it, Matt. And I think that the shift that we need to make is ROI doesn't have to be hardcore financial, what did you save? It can be enhancement in your mission-driven benefits, right? Your mission-oriented benefits. And that almost always links to revenue. So it's a classic top line or bottom line growth, right? So I look forward to future discussions as well. Thank you very much.